Welcome to Veritate with your host, Johnny Mack, a podcast that will dive deep into the pursuit of truth in a world filled with noise, confusion, and fleeting opinions. We will seek to uncover the eternal, unshakable truths that shape our lives and our beliefs, from faith and philosophy to history and culture. We'll explore the questions that matter, challenge the answers we've been given, and seek the wisdom that has stood the test of time. So join Johnny Mack in this journey to discover what's real, what's right, and what's true.
So where did Veritate start? Year was 2003, and my father, he was dying of cancer at that time, and my mom and my wife, I was in the room with him. And at some point, Mom and my wife, they went to go get something to eat, and so for a little while, I was just there, and it was Dad and myself, and he told me something that I didn't know. He told me that years earlier, he had made a promise to God, and that really surprised me because I never thought my father would do something like that. But there he was. He was laying in his hospital bed, and he was dying, and he was thinking about God. And then he turned to me, and he looked, and he asked, he said, "What if I'm wrong?" Now, I remember searching for something to say, but the truth was, I didn't know either. Because I had no faith to give him. I had no great theological answer. I wasn't even sure at that time that there was a God. And so I reached out for the only thing that I could think of. I told him about the thief on the cross. And here was this dying man that was next to Christ, and his life was over, and there was no time to fix anything. There was no time to prove himself. There was no lifetime of good works left. And all he could do was look at Christ and say, "Remember me." And then Christ tells him, "Today you will be with me in paradise." And then I prayed the Our Father out loud to my dad. And this was a prayer that I knew by memory, but it was also a prayer I didn't believe. And my dad closed his eyes, and I sat there wondering if anything I'd told him was true. And he died. But that question never did. What if I am wrong? That question followed me for years. And eventually I knew I would have to answer it for myself. And so this is my conversion story. And strangely enough, I suppose it starts at Parris Island because at that time the Marine Corps had asked me what religion I was. And I said Roman Catholic. Now, before anybody mistakes this for some early movement of grace on my part, there was a very practical reason for becoming Catholic at that point. Catholic Mass lasted about 2 hours, and Protestant services, they only lasted about an hour. And if anyone said that they were atheist, well, you got to stay behind and you had to clean in the barracks. So Roman Catholic it was. So I admit I'm not Augustine in the garden, but it did accomplish something. I learned the Our Father because we said it every night. Every night, tune 11:12, pray, "Our Father who art in heaven." I didn't believe a word of it. I just learned it because we kept saying it. And I had absolutely no idea that years later, those words would be the only thing I could think of to give my dying father. And in 1995, I nearly died myself. I was in Dallas, Texas. I went into what they call an anaphylactic shock. And they took me in and they pumped my stomach. I woke up intubated. And standing over me was a Catholic priest giving me last rites. Because you have to remember, my dog tags that hung around my neck said Roman Catholic. And so this priest saw a Catholic who might die, and he did exactly what a priest is supposed to do. And here I lay with a tube down my throat. I wasn't exactly in a position to explain that there'd been a misunderstanding. So there I was, receiving the rites of a church that I didn't even believe in. And life went on. Then my father died, and that question stayed with me. What if I am wrong? So then a year later, after that, 2004, I'm mobilizing for Iraq at Camp Shelby. And if you've ever mobilized with the military, you know how this works, right? It's station after station. It's medical, it's dental, it's administrative, the chaplain. And so I go to the chaplain station, and I'll never forget the man. May he rest in peace. Father Fenton Kilmurray. He walks over to me and he looks at my dog tags and he pulls them out and he says, Roman Catholic are we, boy? And then he starts asking me questions. Now, I have a huge problem because Father Kilmurray, there's a cross on one side of his uniform, but on the other side, there's a full bird colonel. And I'm a staff sergeant. And I'm standing there and I'm thinking, okay, do I tell this colonel that I have lied about being Catholic? Because lying, at least to a superior officer, sounds like something that could become a problem. Being a bad Catholic, though, it's not that big of a deal. So I'm pretty sure that's not covered by the UCMJ. So I continue to lie and say I'm Catholic. So now Father Kilmurray took me in what I remember being basically a supply closet. And he just sets me down on a box and looks at me and he says, out with it, me boy. And he heard my confession. And I had no idea how to make a confession. And I didn't even really believe in what it was we were doing, but I made one anyway. And then we went to war. And if you expect me to sit here and tell you that Iraq made me believe in God, it didn't. It actually pushed me in the other direction because I saw things done in the name of religion that made religion itself look like it was the problem. I remember of a man that poisoned his own daughter while we were there. And he had taken 155 rounds and he packed them inside of her body. And as anybody approached, they detonated it. They would scream out, Allahu Akbar, God is great, believing that they'd killed one of us. So now when you see things like that, you hear things like that, and religion doesn't look holy to you anymore. And to me, it looked like it was dangerous. And that actually became the lens with which I saw religious people. And I don't care who it was, Muslim, Christian, whatever. It was just different degrees of the same thing. It was people that were claiming certainty about God. And some of them were moderate and some of them were extreme, but I didn't see much reason to believe any of them actually knew. And yet, my father's question was still in my head. What if I am wrong? Now, in 2004, another thing happens. I became a father myself while I was deployed. And that changed the stakes. Because now I got children looking to me for answers. And I wanted something for them that mattered deeply to me. I wanted them to have the truth. And I wanted to protect them from the things that I had not been protected from myself. So if my children ask me something, I want to tell them what's true. Not what's convenient, not what everybody else believes, not something I inherited, truth. Just truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God. And if I didn't know the answer, then I needed to go find it. Because if God existed, my children deserved to know that. And if he didn't, then they deserve to know that too. So now, in 2012, I get stationed away from my family. And I started studying. I mean, seriously studying. I watched my daughters grow. And they would ask questions about everything. And so I started collecting books. And I collected a lot of books. If you ever see this bookshelf that's behind me, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about because it is religion after religion. I took notes. I listened to lectures. I watched documentaries. I listened to arguments. I studied history. And I tried to be fair. Everybody got the same rules. And eventually, the 4 questions started emerging from all of these notes. Who is God? Who is man? What went wrong? How's it fixed? And I didn't know it at the time, but those questions eventually become part of what Veritate is. And at the time, it was just my way of keeping everybody honest, including Christianity. And Christianity was frustrating because which Christianity? There were thousands of denominations to pick from. Everybody has their own Bible. Everybody could quote it. And everybody seemed capable of explaining why everybody else had gotten it wrong. So eventually, I realized I was getting ahead of myself. Because before I could figure out which Christians were right, I needed to answer a more basic question, which is, was Christ real? And more specifically, did he actually rise from the dead? Because everything hangs on that. Look, if Jesus stayed dead, Christianity is finished. Just close the churches, sell the buildings, and go home. But if that tomb was empty because he actually rose from the dead, well, now we got a problem. So I went looking for the evidence. And eventually, I came across what I thought had already been debunked. The Shroud of Turin, you know the story. I've said it over and over again. 1988 was the carbon dating test. They said it was medieval and the case was closed. Except, apparently the case wasn't closed because people were still studying it and people still study it today. And researchers are still publishing things today. And so there's all these arguments about the sample and arguments about the image. There's the blood, the chemistry, and all of that bothered me because if this thing has been conclusively exposed as a medieval fake, then why are people still studying it? But then I found something I never heard of, the Sudarium of Oviedo, which is a completely separate cloth. It's associated by tradition with the burial of Christ. And researchers had reported several correlations between the Sudarium and the Shroud, including the same reported blood group, which was AB. Now, none of that proved the resurrection, and it still doesn't. But I couldn't get rid of that. And so I kept thinking, if somebody forged the Shroud, then how did all these things come together? How would a medieval forger even know to account for something like blood type? So maybe there is an explanation for it. Fine. Let's look for it. Show me. And that's how I approached it. I was not trying to prove Christianity. And in many ways, I was trying to eliminate it. But it just wouldn't go away. And so now by 2019, this kind of studying had become part of my normal life. And I'd listen to documentaries and I'd listen to lectures while I was driving around. And then one day, I'm stuck in the traffic on State Route 347. I'm coming home from work. And for anyone who knows about the 347, I had plenty of time. And I was listening to a discussion about the Shroud. And they were talking about the image and the theories concerning what kind of energy or light might have produced something like that. But then something just caught my mind. And that was, wait, light. What about Paul? Didn't Paul see something like this on the road to Damascus? And so Paul encounters the risen Christ in this extraordinary light, and afterward he can't see. And I started thinking about something incredibly ordinary. Why is it you can't stare into a laser? And that is because a light that intense can damage your eyes. And so then I'm thinking about Paul. I'm thinking about his eyes. I'm thinking about the light. I'm thinking about the Shroud. I'm thinking about the Sudarium. I'm thinking about the resurrection. And then all of these things, I had kept them in separate compartments. They started to come together. And then another question came to me. And it's the question that Christ asked of his apostles. Who do you say that I am? And all of a sudden, this isn't an academic exercise anymore. I had spent years asking questions about everybody else. What if Muslims are wrong? What if Christians are wrong? What if Catholics are wrong? My father had asked me, what if I am wrong? And I'm sitting there in this traffic on the 347, and finally I had to ask, what if I'm wrong? Now, who do you say that I am? And I knew that I had to answer it. But accepting Christ created another problem, because which Christianity? And then that's where Paul come back again. He was then Saul, and he was going to Damascus, and he was there to persecute Christians. Now keep in mind, Christ is already risen at this point. So Saul's not physically hunting Jesus. He was hunting Christians. And then the risen Christ asked him, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Me. That word stopped me. because Christ did not separate himself from his church. And then there was Peter. Upon this rock, I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. So now I went back to history. If Christ built the church, then where was it? Because it didn't make sense to me that Christ said he would establish his church and then promise that hell wouldn't overcome it and then allow the thing to disappear until somebody reconstructed Christianity 1,500 years later. So I followed history backwards. Before Luther, before the Reformation, the councils, the bishops, Rome, Peter, and there it was. I didn't choose Catholicism because I particularly wanted Catholicism to be true. At that point, Catholicism was mostly inconvenient. But I had spent years telling myself, follow the truth wherever it leads. Well, it led here. And now I had a choice. Follow it or admit that truth wasn't really what I'd been looking for. And so I drove straight to the Catholic Church. I didn't make an appointment. I didn't call. I went running to the doors. And there he was. Father Velasquez. I told him that I needed confession. And I don't know what my face looked like at the time, but apparently it was enough because he turned around. He opened up the confessional and he listened for about an hour. 46 years. Everything I could remember, things I had done, things I had failed to do, a lifetime lived mostly as though God had no authority over me at all. And when it was finally over, I cried. Reconciliation. And that's the only word I have for it. And then Father Velasquez gave me my penance. One, Our Father. One. After 46 years. I remember sitting there, I was dumbfounded. That's it? One, Our Father? Now, at the time, I made absolutely no connection at all. Not to Paris Highland, not to my father, nothing. I simply prayed my penance. Our Father who art in heaven. The same prayer I had to memorize because I didn't want to clean the barracks. The same prayer I'd given to my dying father when I wasn't even sure that God was listening. And now I was saying those words as a man who believed them. I wouldn't understand that connection until much later, but conversion wasn't the end of the story. In some ways, it's where things got serious. We started going to Mass on Palm Sunday in 2019. Not long afterward, my wife asked me to feel something on our 9-year-old son's wrist. And at the time, John was playing baseball. And there was a bump on the side of his wrist. And we thought maybe he'd been hit by a baseball or something. But they took an x-ray. And then on a Friday, we get a phone call. And they wanted him at the Core Institute on a Tuesday. That fast. And when somebody moves your 9-year-old child through a medical system that quick, you know they're worried. Because the x-ray showed a mass, and inside it there was something that looked like an oak leaf cluster. But the language I remember hearing, and the language that I saw written on it, was aggressive, malignant etiologies cannot be ruled out. Cancer. Possibly aggressive cancer. And immediately, I was back with my father. Cancer. And his promise to God. And his question, what if I'm wrong? And I felt like I was standing at the same crossroads. Except this time, I believed. At this particular Mass, I went up to receive, and I began to receive communion kneeling and on the tongue. Father Jude noticed it, and he asked me, where had I learned to receive this way, and why was I doing that? And during that conversation, I told him about John. And then he told me to bring John to the church to see Father Jay. And I prayed, and I made God a promise. if you heal my son, I will be obedient. And that was it. Obedient. The doctors at the Core Institute ordered an MRI to be done. I had to wait 3 weeks. And that was the longest 3 weeks of my life, of wondering whether or not my 9-year-old son had cancer. And finally, when they did the MRI, the thing that they had seen on the x-ray, now they see cartilage. No oak leaf structure, no mass, nothing resembling what had frightened everybody in the first place. And because it was so close to a growth plate, they decided they'd still remove it. And so they operated on him. And what did they find? Cartilage. Whatever had been there on that first image, it wasn't there anymore. Now look, I know I'm no doctor, but when you get an x-ray of a tumor inside your son's wrist that has an oak leaf structure, I promise you, you're going to do more research in the next few days than you've ever done in your life. And you'll know what I'm talking about if you've ever been there. And I'm not going to tell you that I can prove anything scientifically about what happened, because I can't. I'm only telling you what happened. And I'm telling you also what happened next. So John loved to go looking for these holy cards that would sit at the back of the church. They're saint cards. You find them in the church. And one day, he goes back to look for the saint cards, and he walks over to a display of CDs and DVDs. There's no reason to go over there and look, but John was looking everywhere, and he reaches his hand into one of the slots and shoved into the corner of one of the slots of where the DVDs are. I mean, completely out of place. And John finds this card, and then he gets in the truck and he shows it to me. This card was beautiful. It was trimmed with gold foil, and it's one of the most impressive cards that I think I've ever seen. And I turn it over, and it's the Anima Christi. I've never heard of it at this time. And then I read the words of this prayer. And there's a line that's in it that says, "From the malignant enemy, protect me." Malignant. I've just spent weeks hearing that word applied to my 9-year-old son. Aggressive, malignant etiologies cannot be ruled out. And now that same child is sitting beside me holding a prayer card that he found tucked away in the back of a church. From the malignant enemy, protect me. And I couldn't stop crying. I still can't. And you can call that coincidence. That's fine. And I'm not going to argue with you about it. I'm just simply telling you what happened and what it meant to me. Because my conversion had begun intellectually, with evidence, with history, with arguments, with Christ, his church. But this was different, because this was my son. And I had asked God for his life. And I had given God my word. And John is still here. So as far as I'm concerned, I have a promise to keep for the rest of my life. Sometimes I feel like I shouldn't even ask God for anything else, because what else do I need to ask for? My son is here. Father Velasquez was moved shortly thereafter, and then COVID happened. And I have to admit, I saw the irony. I finally convert and the whole world shuts down. But COVID forced me to confront what obedience actually meant. Because the church is closed, the dispensations came, and I struggled with it. Because God commanded us to keep holy the Sabbath. It's a commandment. Jesus said, "If you love me, you will keep my commandments." And it's written in stone for God's sake. So I could understand sickness and I could understand necessity, but I had made a promise. Obedience. So I kept looking for a way to worship. And eventually, that brought me to the traditional Latin Mass. And I walked in, and all of a sudden, something clicked. I had spent years approaching religion by asking questions. What is true? What can be demonstrated? What does history say? But the Mass taught me something else. Worship isn't primarily about me at all. It's not about whether or not I like the music. It's not about whether or not I'm entertained. It's not about whether I feel something. No, God is God, and I am not. He is owed worship. And for me, that settled something. Faith wasn't merely about discovering truth anymore. Now I had to submit to it because I had made God a promise. And so when your feelings fail, obedience remains. And through all of this, my father never really left the story because I pray for him often. And there are times I would give almost anything for just 1 minute with my father. Just one. And I would sit beside him and I would say, Dad, I found the answer. I wish I'd have known then what I know now. I wish when you asked me, what if I'm wrong, I could have answered you. And I couldn't because my hands were empty. Or almost empty. Because I did have one thing. I had the Our Father. And now I understand something that I couldn't understand then. That prayer didn't become true when I started believing it. It was true when I said it at Paris Island. It was true when I said it beside my father's bed. I was simply late to believing it. Now, I don't know what happened between my father and God in those final moments, and I won't even pretend that I do. But I know what I saw. I saw a dying man asking, what if I'm wrong? I know I told him about the thief on the cross. I know I prayed the Our Father out loud. And I know he closed his eyes. And the rest belongs to God. But now I can still do something for him. I can pray. And so I do. At Mass, in the Rosary, whenever he comes to mind. And there's sometimes I even wonder if my father's been part of my conversion from wherever he may be. I don't know. But I pray for him. And I would give anything to tell him what I know now. Maybe that's part of why Veritate exists. Because I realize that some people may never question. They may never fill bookshelves with religions. They may never spend years taking notes. They may never ask the questions that I ask. So I started to leave breadcrumbs. And that's what Veritate is. I'm not asking you to believe something because I said it. Don't. Check me on it. Read yourself. Study. Ask questions. Follow the evidence yourself. I'm simply trying to give away what I received. And that's truth. And to give it with charity. Caritas in veritate. It means charity in truth. And eventually that became something even more practical. Confession. Because as I began going regularly, and especially as I experienced confession in both the traditional form and the ordinary form, I discovered that I was constantly juggling resources. I had an app, I had a prayer book, I had an examination of conscience, and I was trying to remember the differences. I was trying to know what to say, and I kept thinking, why isn't this simply just in one place? And then I thought about my own history. Sergeant Mac standing in a supply closet with Father Kilmurray having absolutely no idea how to make a confession. And then 46 years later, I'm running through the doors looking for Father Velasquez. And an hour in a confessional, and one Our Father. And so I've built something. It's called Veritate Confessio. And it's available on Apple's App Store, and it's also available on Google Play now. And I built it so that a Catholic can have one place to prepare for confession. It has an examination of conscience. It has the traditional form. It has the ordinary form. It has the 10 Commandments. It has the 7 deadly sins. Everything's organized so that you can stop worrying about what comes next and just concentrate on telling the truth. It doesn't replace confession, and it can't, because an app cannot forgive a single sin. You need the sacrament. You need the priest. You need contrition. You have to actually walk through the door. But maybe you're sitting in a car outside a Catholic church right now. Maybe you know you need a confession. And maybe it's been 10 years. Maybe it's been 20 or, 46. And maybe you're scared because you don't even know what you're supposed to say. And I understand that. So open up. Veritate confessio. And prepare. Examine your conscience honestly. And then put the phone away. Walk through the door. Tell the priest the truth. Because the app can't forgive you. But maybe it can help you get to the place where Christ will. And that's why I built it. It's just another breadcrumb. I'm trying to give somebody else what I once needed. Something to hold until they're ready to walk through the door. And I suppose that's where season 2 should now end. It's where the whole thing started. With my father's question, what if I'm wrong? So maybe you are Catholic. Maybe you're Protestant. Maybe you're Muslim. Maybe you're even an atheist. Maybe you haven't seriously even thought about God in 20 years. I am not asking you to take my word for anything. I'm just asking you to have enough courage to ask the question honestly. What if I'm wrong? And then follow the answer. And if it leads you to Christ, keep going. And if Christ leads you to his church, keep going. And if his church leads you to confession, go. If someone you love has died, pray for them. If your children ask you what is true, find out. And if God gives you something, give it away. And that's what I'm trying to do. My father asked me, what if he was wrong? I couldn't give him much. I told him about a thief, and then I gave him an Our Father. And years later, after 46 years of living mostly as though God didn't exist at all, I ran into a Catholic church. And a priest listened to me for an hour. And when it was all finished, he gave me one penance. One Our Father. It took me a long time to see all this. A prayer in the barracks, a priest beside my hospital bed, confession in a supply closet, my father's questions, bookshelves filled with religions, the Shroud, the Sudarium, Paul on the road to Damascus, traffic on the 347. Who do you say that I am? And Father Velasquez standing inside a church when I came running through the door. One Our Father. My 9-year-old son's wrist. Aggressive malignant cancer. A promise. Obedience. An MRI. A holy card tucked into the wrong place. From the malignant enemy, protect me. The Mass. Veritate. Confessio. You see, none of these things looked connected when I was living them. Some of them actually looked meaningless. And some of them terrified me. Some of them hurt. And some of them looked like coincidence. I can only tell you what happened when I kept following the truth. It led me to Christ. And it led me to his church. And once I knew, I had a responsibility. Give away what had been given to me. Leave some breadcrumbs. Help the next person. So my father asked, what if I'm wrong? Dad, I wish I could have answered you then, but I couldn't. My hands were empty. But I did give you one thing. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. And now I will spend whatever time God gives me trying to give what I finally received. Truth, faith, and hope. And a few breadcrumbs for whoever comes behind me. My hands aren't empty anymore. This is Veritate, and I'll see you next season. May God bless you all.
Thank you for listening to Veritate. If you would like to contact the show, please email us at veritate@yahoo.com. That's veritate@yahoo.com. Thanks again, and we look forward to hearing from you. May God bless you all.